So thank you for coming. We're going to talk about how to contribute to an open source project like Postgres. As I did some research getting ready for this talk, I realized, of course, that there are different people in the community, some of whom are here this week, who have given similar talks in the past, and I'll be sure to reference those as we go along the way. And in fact, there's a really interesting talk tomorrow that I want to make sure you guys all know about. So my Twitter handle is on screen. My name is Claire Giordano. And this is an evolution of a talk I've given before. I gave it at FOSDEM right before COVID, called Fibonacci's Spirals and 21 Ways to Contribute to Postgres Beyond Code. Although in this talk, I focus on the whole gamut. So it's no longer just the things that are beyond code. And when I was thinking about this talk, I was trying to figure out, well, who's going to be in the audience and what kinds of people might be interested in an introductory talk about how to give back to Postgres. And the first class of people I thought about, well, are users, right? These are people whose livelihoods and whose applications are relying on Postgres, and they certainly have things they can offer to the community that will help grow the ecosystem. And then the second class of people, I just noticed there's live captioning. That's great. Oh, I'm super happy about that. Okay. We'll see if they spell Postgres right, though, as I say it. Postgres? Postgres? Oh, there's a little latency here. Okay. Oh, my goodness gracious, that's correct. Wow. Okay. So people who have new jobs in a Postgres company, and they might be figuring out not just what their new job is about, but how they're going to participate in and contribute into the community. And then a third class of people I thought might be in the room are people who are doing a job search and looking to skill up on Postgres. Or, oftentimes when I've done a big job search, I've wanted a side gig. I don't want to spend all day, every day, selling myself or my skills or interviewing companies to figure out if it's a good cultural fit. I want to be creating something and building something too. And so sometimes having that side gig can make the whole process more sane. And so maybe people are doing that. And then a fourth group of people I thought of were, Thomas Monroe is the canonical example. He's the Postgres committer who works on our team at Microsoft, and he's based in New Zealand. And the way he first got started with Postgres is he was working, I guess, for some application company and really needed a feature in Postgres in order to be able to use it, and had to do with queues and skip locked, and so he had to dig in, he had to solve that problem, or as Rob Treat says, someone has an itch that they just have to scratch, and so they get started that way. And then the fifth class I thought of, and y'all may think of other classes and groups that could benefit from this talk too that I've missed, are people who are just interested in databases. And so they end up hacking on Postgres as a way of furthering their learning, and then of course eventually before they know it they're hooked and they're here for decades. And there are some people I can think of who fall into that bucket. So for me, once upon a time, I was in that third group. I had a new job in a Postgres company 5 years ago at Citus Data, and that's how I got started in this group. And so as I wrote this talk, I was thinking about what would I have wanted to learn from and to see 5 years ago. Of course, the world's a little bit different now. Tiny bit about me, only because when I listen to somebody else's talk, I want to know a bit about their expertise or their background so that I can understand where they're coming from. I started my career as an engineer after getting a degree in applied mathematics and computer science at Brown, and I worked at Sun Microsystems for a very long time. Started in developer tools on a predecessor to a predecessor, I'm older than I look, to Git and GitHub, and then I moved over into the operating systems group, which was actually because I got engaged to my husband and we didn't want to be in the same part of the company, but never mind. Moved over to the operating systems group and spent a long time there, and in fact ultimately ended up leading the effort to open source Solaris. So that was my first open source engagement, and that I just dated myself there. And then about 5 years ago joined Citus Data, and we were acquired by Microsoft. Was it 3 years ago now? So that's a bit about my background. I have had roles as an engineer, as an engineering leader and director, and then also as a product leader. And at Citus, I was actually product marketing. So different kinds of functional roles too, as well as in different technology spaces. So let's dive in. But before we dive in, a couple things. I think most of you know this, but as with any open source project, there's a code of conduct. So before you contribute or participate in Postgres, it's always important to know about that code of conduct. So I put a link there on the left. And then on the right, I put this thing called mailing list culture. Now, how many of you are familiar with the mailing lists in Postgres? So about half of you. It's something that is really unique about Postgres. You know, lots of other communities these days do all of their commits on GitHub and use PRs to kind of track all those changes and to manage all those discussions. And Postgres uses this mailing list system. And I put a couple of the mailing lists, not all, on the right-hand side. You'll hear people talk about PGCQL hackers, PGCQL general, PGCQL docs. Is it better when I hold it closer to my mouth? Doesn't matter? I'm good either way? Okay. And you can find all of the mailing lists at postgresql.org/list, as well as a definition of each of them. And then you subscribe to the ones that might be relevant to you. I will say that PGCQL Hackers is a very, very chatty mailing list. So, you know, make sure it's not mixed in with whatever your day job requires you in terms of your mail. And the other thing you should know about the mailing list is there's very much an etiquette that you're going to want to understand before you weigh in and start participating. There's definitely a way things are done. Of course, be respectful, avoid personal attacks. That's kind of normal across most open source projects. But, you know, they're sticklers for removing those confidentiality notices because, of course, everything on all the mailing lists, with the possible exception of security, is public. And it's public for the world to see. So confidentiality notices are just noise and annoying, and they don't hold. And you reply all. These things are not taken off in little private forked threads. Everything builds on top. So this is not the point of the talk. I just wanted to highlight that this is something you would need to spin up on and learn about if you haven't already. And obviously some people that watch this talk are very familiar with this. So for today's talk, I'm going to cover 13 different ways to contribute to Postgres, as well as some tips and suggestions I have for things you might optimize or things you might pay attention to as you participate in each of these different areas. And I put them in 3 different buckets. I move these puzzle pieces around 10 ways to Sunday before actually finalizing on these 3 buckets because everything's interrelated when it comes to collaborating on a database project. But the first column is all about sharing. So sharing your expertise, sharing your perspective, sharing your knowledge with others in the community, and how that's valuable and appreciated, and how it can actually help the Postgres ecosystem grow and get better. The second column is all about, I said feedback is gold because I truly believe feedback is a gift. And most people in other communities sometimes don't even bother to give it at times, right? It's a lot of work to give feedback. But those things are, I think, ways to contribute that you might not think of. Like some people think contribution equals code, right? But these are all ways to contribute. Do you have a question? Yes. There's a microphone they can pass you in the back, and that. No, you can ask now, but it's just, it'll be part of the recording if you speak.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah.
So when you talk about code, I come from the Oracle background. There's a rich ecosystem in like community-based tools or scripts or utilities and things like that that people build, they're practical, and they share. So when you say code here, is this really talking about the mainline code, like the actual Postgres code, or would this be like a sidecar thing that somebody builds independently? Because I could have thought what I just described might be in column 1.
That's a really good question. The second column was about feedback and how valuable that is. And I put patch review there, interestingly, even though patch review is a lot about code. And then in the code column, when I talk about contributing code and I get into that section, because we're going to dive into each one of these as I go through the talk, you'll see that I'm talking about the core, as we call it, as well as like contrib modules and extensions and ecosystem tooling and drivers, right? And so there's a lot of different parts of the code that one can contribute to and ways to start participating. So I don't know if I answered your question, but if I didn't, wait till the end and we'll get to it at the end, okay? All right. So the other thing I wanted to point out, that just like racing sailboats, I strongly believe that all these different ways to contribute to the Postgres ecosystem are valuable. This is a picture taken last September, so a year ago now, at the Big Boats series, which is a wonderful Rolex Big Boat race that is held in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my son is actually the blue guy right here in the boat. So this is a real picture. It's not stock photography or anything like that. And they didn't win, but they did really well. Anyway, when you're racing a boat, all the roles matter. Whether you're managing whether you're managing the lines, or whether you're the helmsman, or whether you're the captain, or whether you're dealing with the spinnaker, like every single one of you has a role to play in helping you to win or lose. And so that's one of the things that is important to me, especially because I've worked in engineering as a developer, I've worked as an engineering manager, I've worked as a product manager, and I see value in each of those different roles. And same thing in the Postgres ecosystem. I see value in all these different ways to contribute. About 9 years ago, is it 9 years ago? 2013, yeah. Josh Burkus, who's an emeritus member of the Postgres community, he gave a talk called How to Contribute to Postgres, or 50 Ways to Love Your Project. And I put the URL up there. The slides are still available on GitHub. This talk has staying power because so much of it is still relevant to this day. And in his talk, he had this pie chart. And this is how he drew the contribution pie back in 2013. As you can see, the dark blue slice is code, and then the brighter blue slice is other code, and then there's everything else. There's a lot of everything else here. So there are lots of different ways for people, depending on where you are in your experience with Postgres and what you want to do and what your objectives are. There's a lot of different ways to make things better. Okay, so let's dive into the first category. Sharing is caring. That sounds so corny. I couldn't think of anything else that was memorable, though. I bet you'll remember sharing is caring. So we'll see. And the first thing, if you're a user, so how many in the room, of course, we have the people who are going to watch this on video later, but how many in the room are actually users of Postgres? Can you show me? Okay, so almost half of you. That's pretty cool. Telling that user story, and maybe not just once, but maybe multiple times over the years about, what your performance is, or how you solved a problem, or how you architected your application to take advantage of some new features. Whatever that user story is so valuable to other Postgres users and to other, both today and in the future. And whether you tell that story, there's so many formats, right? You can write a blog post, or you can give a conference talk. Actually, conferences love user stories, particularly if you can demonstrate that you'll do the work to make it engaging and interesting and not, dry and bland. Podcast interviews, podcasts are a thing, and you can go get interviewed by one of the several podcasts that exist in the Postgres world and share with people what your experience has been. So lots of ways to tell those stories. Even a Twitter thread can add a lot of value, and it's definitely a lot less work than writing a blog post. So the things I always advise people to remember when they are telling user stories are, and these might be obvious to you, but they're forgotten by so many people. So I'm going to go ahead and point them out just in case. The first is that the headline of your story really matters for SEO. So, Google truncates at 60 characters in search results, and so you need to kind of front load your title, make sure the most important words are in those first 60 characters, including spaces. And you also need to think about, well, what queries are people typing in? What words are they using when they go into Google or Bing or whatever? And what do I want this to match to? And also, what will be compelling? Like, what's boring title versus what's really interesting, and what are people likely to click on? Also, everybody's busy. So I try to work, when I'm working with engineers on getting stories written, focusing on scannability. Like making sure there are bullets, tables, diagrams. Not everybody likes to read big, thick, chunky paragraphs of English language, or any language for that matter. So making things short and sweet, putting like H2 section headlines throughout. So you could almost like read all the bold font H2 section headlines and get a really good high-level understanding of what that story is about. And I mean headlines, not subject titles, not like conclusion. because conclusion doesn't tell me anything except that I've got to go read a bunch of big, thick, chunky paragraphs that might be a lot of work. So anyway, those are tips that I share with people freely when they ask me about how to tell these user stories. I wanted to give one example, and this is a little, it's not self-serving, but I have a role in this. I co-authored this blog post with the technical lead of the UK COVID-19 dashboard last year. And it was a lot of work because it was a pretty complicated story that he had to tell, but it was also a lot of fun. And we published the story, and it got like 80,000 views, which is a lot for me. So I was pretty excited about that. And the graphic over there is taken from their interactive dashboard. It's based on these massive amounts of data, and it runs on Postgres and Citus, which is where I came in. And so, yeah. Telling user stories. The second thing I wanted to say is not everybody likes to read to learn. A lot of us do. And particularly in the Postgres world where everything's on mailing lists, if you're actually one of the committers or contributors, you're probably really good at reading and writing because that's how this community communicates. But video and video demos are really helpful for people whose brains process information differently and who need to see it, not just read about it. And so I always encourage people, if that's a way you can show me how you did that, right? Put together a 10-minute demo, a 5-minute demo, and get it out there and get it up on YouTube. That will help other Postgres users learn from your experience. This is actually not quite a Postgres user. It's a screenshot of a video made by a teammate of mine, Marco Slot, and he is the technical lead for the Citus extension. And so this was all about how the Citus extension was implemented. And he put together this video as part of his SIGMOD paper. But the reason I used it as an example is I wanted to show the metadata, which I put together. So I knew that it would have all the right components that I wanted to show you. Thumbnails are huge, right? They matter a lot. They affect whether someone clicks it. This is not the thumbnail. This is the cover slide, but the thumbnail is much pithier and more, it grabs you more visually. Things like video bookmarks and chapters, you know, the hashtags, the links, having a description in there that's keyword rich, all those things matter too. Okay, number 3. And I'll speed up or slow down, depending on the looks on your faces. So I'll try to assess if you guys are interested or getting bored along the way. Number 3 is promoting can help grow the ecosystem. So it just does, right? If something happens in this room and nobody ever tells anybody about it, and it's not recorded, and it's not tweeted, and I don't blog post about it, and you know, only we are going to know about it. So getting the word out there matters. So this is a screenshot of Letitia Avro giving a talk at PGA Day Austria, which was just a couple weeks ago, right? Was anybody here there by any chance? Yes. I know there were a couple other people here at this conference, and obviously Letitia. And Francesco Tisiot, who works at Ivan, tweeted about it and put the picture up there and talked about what it was about, and that's the only way I learned about it, right? It was because he promoted it and shared that information. Now, of course, I'm friends with Letitia, so maybe I was more incented to pay attention and to care. But it's still, if I was interested in Postgres on Kubernetes and I saw this come across, you know, I'd be tempted to reach out to Francesco and say, hey, do you know where those slides are? I want to check that out, or was it recorded? And there are so many things you can signal boost, not just somebody giving a conference talk, but today I learned, or you know, a meetup that you are helping to organize, or we're just at, or how to do something, or something you observed. I mean, there's just a lot of expertise that you probably have that you could share. And you would share on all the normal socials. I think you guys are all familiar with this. But interestingly, like, it takes a lot of work to know how to post on Reddit without, you know, having haters come out of the woodwork, or how to tweet without accidentally tagging the wrong people, or, you know, starting with at the beginning and then nobody ever sees it. I mean, there are these conventions and these things you have to learn. So for most people that I know, most people are not on all of these social channels. So you kind of have to pick your poison. But whatever it is can become the place you become very comfortable with and comfortable sharing information. Simon has another question. Is that on, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually just read somewhere somebody had a suggestion for getting the best responses on this social media, which is to have 2 accounts, one where you post the question and one where you go in and you post a very, very wrong answer, because people are more incentivized to try and correct somebody who's incorrect than it is to just generally answer. So maybe that's a bit the wrong intent, but I was going to say malicious, but no. But I think it seriously might work.
There are a lot of people who have alt accounts, and they don't share what those are, and they're very careful. They keep it close to the vest. But yeah, a lot of folks are quick to correct, right? And not as quick to compliment. I think that may be human nature. So I try to bend over backwards and compliment where I can, just because I think it can make someone's day in a really big way, and can make them feel good about the work that they're doing. But lots of places to promote and share. Okay, number 4, meetups. You guys, how many of you have been to a Postgres user group or a Postgres meetup? Okay, maybe like a fifth of the people in the room. And I know you said that you manage the DC pug, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. So running a meetup, organizing a meetup, that's work, I assume, correct?
No, not at all. No,
Sarcasm,
yes, it's
sarcasm.
work.
So, but there are cities where there are no Postgres user groups right now and meetups. And if you live in one of those and think there's a community around there, like starting a meetup, starting a user group would be fabulous for that local community. The other thing people can do is if people are back in the office, I know not everybody is yet, but offering up your office space to one of the local user groups, that's really appreciated. Some of the pugs like to rotate locations so that they're not always in the same company's office space. It creates some variety, it brings in new people, maybe the new location is easier for them to get to or whatever. Obviously, you could volunteer to speak. You could also, if your company has budget, send some money to that user group for the food and drink for that evening or afternoon. So there's a lot of ways to contribute that all make a difference. Do you want to add in? Yes, please.
Yeah. So one thing that's been super supportive is the local, the regional. Can you hear me?
There. No.
Okay, there you go.
Closer.
Yeah. The regional Postgres user group community is great, and it's easy to go talk to, like for me, the Philly or the New York group, and be like, hey, is there any good talks that came up recently that were popular? Maybe the speaker can come down. Bruce Momjin has come down to the DC one a bunch of times, and it's great. It's a good community.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that. You're better than me because I haven't been doing that for any of our local pugs. This is a screenshot of a user group in the Netherlands. And actually, I know a couple of people in the audience, so I thought it was a great picture. And so nice and vibrant. Everybody's really interested. Every seat is filled. That's what I like to see. And that's why I picked it. Okay, number 5, answering questions and sharing your experience. And those are slightly different, so slightly different nuances, so I'll try to explain. But there are a lot of questions. I don't know how many of you are already on the Postgres Slack? Show of hands? Oh, good. So maybe a quarter of the room, a fifth. IRC channel, the Stack Overflow has a hashtag PostgreSQL. There are questions being asked every single day. The screenshot on the right is from the Postgres Slack. I took it yesterday. For privacy, I blocked out people's names and bio pictures. But as I was taking the screenshot, more and more questions piled on. And I think the first one has 13 replies, and the second one has 81 replies or something. It's probably bigger now. So there are other people already helping to answer questions, which is great. And you might think, yeah, what do I have to offer? Should I really do that? But I suspect you probably have a lot to offer. And we'll keep growing this ecosystem and getting more Postgres users and helping people find answers to their questions more quickly, the more of us are out there answering questions. The second point, and this is one that Melanie Placement, who's a Postgres contributor that I work with at Microsoft, and she really wanted me to highlight, is that if you're a user and you have a real-world application that runs on Postgres, sharing that perspective on the mailing list is also super valuable. It's not really like you're answering a question, although you could answer a question on PGSQL General or PGSQL novice even, but it's more that maybe people are discussing a fix to a bug or the performance of a new feature, and you could chime in with whether that will or won't work for your application. And sharing that perspective is really, really valuable. Okay, so now let's go into the second bucket, which is all about giving feedback, which I guess that sort of was. And like I said, I moved these pieces around, and these are not strictly orthogonal buckets here. And we'll talk about how feedback is gold. Docs, documentation. So a lot of times, particularly if you're in those classes where you're just getting started with Postgres, you might see something in the docs and it doesn't quite make sense at first. And maybe you go down a dead end and you got to come back and then you got to change some things and you realize you misunderstood the docs. And I don't know about you, but when that happens to me, I usually figure I'm the problem. Like, I just didn't understand, or I was being dumb. I was being stupid. Now, maybe that's a Claire issue, or maybe that's a human nature thing. I don't know how many of you share that, assuming it's pilot error perspective. But usually it's not pilot error. There's a lot of ambiguities in language. There's a lot of things that are unclear, I'm sure, to this day in the docs. And there's room to make it better and better and better. So giving feedback is a gift. Even if you're busy and you're in a hurry, and now that you figured it out, you have a headache and you just want to move on. But take just a moment. At the bottom of each Postgres docs page, there's this submit correction blurb that I screenshotted there. And there's a link there to a form that I show on the next slide where you fill in your name and your email address, and then you can put in the details. And it's attached to whatever page it is that you started to fill out this form on. And this is gold. This is a gift, and this is absolutely a way to contribute. The next, number 7, is reporting bugs with Postgres. So when you find a bug with Postgres, people in the developer community absolutely want to hear about it. So even if you're the bearer of bad news, they want that bad news, and that is a gift. And all those bug reports play a role in making Postgres the rock-solid, reliable database that it is. So you can go onto PostgreSQL.org and see about how to file bugs and where to file them. The gist of it is, and I want to point this out, is that there's a mailing list for it, right? PGCQL bugs at list.postgresql.org. But also there's a bug report web form. And the most important thing to know is that security issues are special. And so if you have run into what you think may be a security issue, not to file that bug, not to fill out that form, because then that goes into a public mailing list that anybody in the world can see, and instead send a note to security@postgresql.org, and then it will remain confidential until the right time. And you can at least talk about it with people and figure out if it should be confidential. So reporting bugs, a way to give feedback. User testing. So right now is a perfect time to talk about this because beta 4 for Postgres 15 is out, and RC1 is going to be out later in September 30th, I think. And so as I was talking to Thomas Monroe and getting ready for this, he said, we love it when real-world users test the new releases in beta form and in release candidate form, and let us know if they find issues, whether it's performance or functionality or whatever it is. But we also like it when they tell us that it worked, That's a nice piece of positive validation, can help us sleep better at night. And so I crafted this imaginary email here, right? I just tested my application with PG15 beta 4 and it worked. But that is something that you can do if you've got that real world perspective. Now, I mentioned performance a minute ago. Number 9 is obviously doing performance regression. And particularly on new releases, it can even be on older releases. This email I screenshotted, it's from June earlier this year. It's actually authored by Andres Freund, who's another Postgres committer that I work with on our team. And so you might think, wait, he's not a user. But he noticed a tweet from Mark Callahan on Twitter, where Mark had done some performance testing and had blogged about it and had raised this pretty explosive slowdown in performance for this scenario. And so Mark's tweet and blog got noticed and it got investigated, and the issue got fixed in Postgres 15, which I think is pretty awesome. And it's a pretty good example of how people out there in the world who are not part of the Postgres community can find these things, and we can react and fix and respond And I think Mark added a lot of value there, as did everybody involved. Okay, number 10. Another type of feedback are patch reviews. So how many of you are familiar with what's called a commit fest? Okay, pretty cool. Some, but not all. So the definition is, and I'm going to read this, a periodic break in Postgres development so that people can focus on review and committing instead of new features and new development. And these happen a bunch of times a year. It takes a whole month. Usually there's a commit fest project manager, and I don't know where those wonderful commit fest managers come from. Has anyone here ever been a commit fest manager? Yeah, I don't know how they do it, but somebody steps up and does it for each of these commit fests. And this is where all the patches, and patch means any kind of change, really, a bug fix, a new feature, whatever it is, will get reviewed. And there's different types of patch review, and Melanie Placement actually has a wonderful talk on contributing to patch reviews that she's given at a bunch of different user groups. So if you haven't had her come out to DC, she lives in the Philadelphia area now, so talk to Melanie. So obviously she talks about usability feedback, like maybe there's some new command line options or a new function, and maybe it's a little confusing. So you can give feedback on that, features, all the functionality associated with it. You might do code review, or you might be giving architectural design feedback. So there's lots of different skill sets you can apply in order to add value to a patch review. And I have not been in a commit fest. So this was an interesting part of this talk for me, is to go spin up and talk to Melanie and read her talk and talk to other people involved and figure out, well, how do these things really happen? But the key is there's a lot of iteration, right? A lot of feedback, a lot of back and forth. Melanie was telling me that in some of the patches that she's been involved in, you iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate. So if your psychology is you're the kind of person where when it's 80% done, you want to be done, maybe don't pick patch review as the way in which you want to contribute. Now, I gravitate towards things where you iterate and iterate and iterate and keep making it better each time, even though it's maybe only a little bit better each of those incremental times. So for me, this is great, but it's not for everyone. The screenshot that I show here on the left is of the upcoming November 2022 Commit Fest. My audio keeps going in and out. Am I doing something wrong, or is it just hold it higher up? Okay. Hold it higher up with my hand. Okay, is that better? I'll do it like this. So this is just the tippity top of the list. There's more to it than that, and I'm sure this Commit Fest list will get longer and longer once people move their focus from getting PG-15 to the finish line to starting to work on what's next. Okay, and then for ways to help on patch review, there are, would someone mind grabbing that door? Do you mind just closing it for me? Thank you, appreciate it. For ways to help with patch review, so many different ways that Melanie included in her, how many minutes do I have? 10, okay, that's plenty of time, I'm good. Whether it's testing perhaps on a really uncommon platform or performance testing on a workload that maybe is very unusual. I don't know if I need to go through all of these, except to say that Melanie's talks are awesome on this topic if you want to dive in deeper. Okay, so now code, which is what Simon asked about in the beginning. So one way to contribute to code is to help with translations. So all the messages in Postgres get translated into a whole bunch of languages. And if you're not familiar, hello, hello, hello? Is that better or worse? It's good? Okay. If you're not familiar, babel.postgresql.org is where all of these native language support messages are housed and where people go in order to collaborate on getting these messages translated. And I know I mentioned this in a talk I gave at FOSDEM a couple years ago, and there was somebody from Italy in the audience, and he literally went and started contributing to all the Italian error messages afterwards, and I was very excited about that. So they really do need help, though. And in fact, Dan Langille just tweeted about this a couple weeks ago, I think. It was quite recent, about how Polish, Korean, and Brazilian Portuguese all need help. And Alvaro was saying that there are a lot of translation catalogs that are going to have to be dropped from PG-15 if we don't get more help translating them. So how many of you speak multiple languages? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Okay. Well, it is something to think about. Maybe not today for the urgency of PG-15, because I know you're all busy, but for the future, it can add value. And you don't have to do a ton. You don't have to sign up to do everything. It's just you're doing your part. And there's a lot of other people helping as well. Okay, so then number 12, updating docs. Not just giving docs feedback, but actually contributing to docs is a way to contribute. And I got stuck trying to put together this material, because no matter who I talked to and no matter where I looked, I couldn't find a well-documented process or page on the wiki or in postgresql.org that said, here is the process for contributing to docs. So I'll keep looking, but what I do know is that PGSQL docs is the mailing list where I could go ask that question, or any of us could go ask that question. There's a /docs top-level directory in the source base. It's in HTML and XML. DocBook is used for Markdown, and I haven't figured out how DocBook is different than HTML in this context. So in this area, I'm not giving you practical tips on how to do it, except to tell you where to get started. And Letitia gave a really great talk right before COVID on demystifying contributing to Postgres. And the first half of it was all about the mechanics of contributing, but then the second half was about her first patch, which was a documentation patch. So there is some detail there, albeit dated back to 2018. My slides are going to be available online, by the way, by tonight. They actually already are. I just haven't tweeted it. So if you need any of these URLs or anything, you'll have access to all the slides. Okay, number 13. So this is contributing code. And the one thing, as I talk to people getting ready, because full disclosure, I'm expert on like the first bunch of items in this talk. Contributing code in Postgres is not something that I've done. But I'm friends with a lot of people. And one of the things they've consistently told me is that, hey, make sure people know there's lots of places to contribute to code, not just core. You don't have to start in core. In fact, one person said the bar is high and the cycles are long. But I don't know that the bar is higher on Postgres than it is on lots of other open source projects that have very high quality standards too. But the cycles are long. There is that iteration, that back and forth, and that persistence that you need to have in order to get your patch reviewed for the Postgres core. So the other piece of advice someone gave me is just be prepared and don't get discouraged, right? It's just the way the process works. If you do want to contribute to the Postgres core, James Coleman, who is here at this conference, is giving a talk tomorrow, but he's here today as well. And it's called Hacking on Postgres. It's in the morning, right before 11 a.m. at 10:50. And he goes deep, deep, deep on contributing to the Postgres core. And so if that's what you want to focus on, absolutely go to James's talk. But in terms of other code that you can contribute to, there's drivers. There's a lot of ways to help make ODBC better or JDBC better. There's the Python drivers. There's the Go driver. There are lots of problems to be solved in this space. In addition, the contrib modules, extensions, there's ecosystem tooling, and I only put a few items on the list. That list should be really, really long. And some of the bigger extensions, you think about Citus or Timescale, like they probably have a bit of a learning curve in order to figure out how to contribute. But there's other extensions that are smaller and much easier to get started in. Maybe PG stat statements is one of them. PG hint plan might be another one, right? There are places to go if you want to roll up your sleeves and you are new to Postgres and don't want to bite off more than you can chew in your first bite at the apple. So that's what I've covered. Lots of ways to contribute. Postgres FDW for foreign data wrappers? Yeah, that probably is another good place too. So if you asked a question, be sure to get your socks from me before you leave the room because I didn't throw them to anybody. And we also have other stuff at the booth. And you want to say something?
just a comment on the last part, which was contributing code.
Yeah. Can you hold this a little closer?
Yeah, just about contributing code, just a comment. I go to a lot of other community events, and more than 3 times they have said the Postgres community code quality and process is the best that they have seen, and they try to emulate that and bring that standard to their community.
Okay, so that's fabulous to hear, and I hope I didn't insult anybody in the Postgres community where I allowed for the possibility that there are other groups with high standards. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the quality of Postgres is why so many people choose it, and why so many people love to work in this community. So, other questions? All right, before we stop, I want to make sure to give thanks to a whole bunch of people who helped me as I was doing my research and getting ready for this talk. This is above and beyond the folks I've worked with for the last 5 years on Citus and in Postgres. So I thank you. And then here I did put my Twitter handle on the screen. If any of you do the Twitter thing and want to follow each other afterwards, I would be happy to do that. Any other questions? I think we are down to the wire anyway, so. I timed it well?
Yeah, you timed it very well. Thank you.
You don't have any questions for me?
Actually, you covered a lot. Let's see, if I had to ask a question. Oh, well, here we go. Question
Okay,
here.
there you go.
Saved by the bell. Here you go.
Yeah, what's the core written in? I actually don't even know. The core. Oh,
C.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
And all the extensions, I mean, or other things can be written in other languages, I guess. Yeah.
I suppose they can be, but I imagine some of them are written in C as well. Do you know?
Yeah, so yeah, the core is definitely in C. Some of the extensions can be written in other languages. Especially like foreign data wrappers. I think there's like a foreign data wrapper, I forget what it's called. It's not the right name, but then you can like use that as the underlying library. And I don't think that's in C. I forget what that's in. Any of the third-party stuff or the supplemental tools can be written in anything. I was working with David Steele and Stephen Frost when PG Backrest was started. Well, actually, the predecessor to PG Backrest, and that was all in Perl originally. So now it's mostly in C. I don't know if they got rid of all the Perl yet, but anyways, yeah.
One more question?
Oh, yep.
Hold it close too, please.
Just to add on to that, there's an excellent open source extensions framework that allows you to write very good extensions, powerful extensions in Rust, and it's very, very good. Do check it out, PGX_RS, I think. But
Okay.
But that's amazing, and now you can develop in Rust and just have it work at Postgres.
Nice plug for that. Yeah, I didn't include anything about Rust when I was talking about drivers and such. I also put the Citus GitHub repo up there too. Always happy for people to check that out. Just because I've worked on it for so long these last 5 years. Thank you all for coming to this talk. Appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much.